Mount Kilimanjaro, with its three volcanic cones, Kibo, Mawenzi, and Shira, is a dormant volcanic mountain in Tanzania. It is the highest mountain in Africa and the highest freestanding mountain in the world at 5,895 meters or 19,341 feet above sea level. Geology: Kilimanjaro is composed of three distinct volcanic cones, Kibo, the highest at 5,895 am, Mawenzi at 5,149 am, and Shira, the shortest at 3,962 am. Uhuru Peak is the highest summit on Kibo's crater rim. Kilimanjaro is a large stratovolcano. Of its three peaks, Mawenzi and Shira are extinct, while Kibo, the highest, is dormant and could erupt again. The last major eruption has been dated to between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. Although dormant, Kibo has gas-emitting fumaroles in its crater. Several collapses and landslides have occurred on Kibo in the past, one creating the area known as the Western Breach. History: Name: the origin of the name Kilimanjaro is not precisely known, but a number of theories exist. European explorers had adopted the name by 1860 and reported that Kilimanjaro was the mountain's Kiswahili name. But according to the 1907 edition of the Nuttall Encyclopedia, the name of the mountain was Kilimanjaro. Johann Ludwig Krapp wrote in 1860 that Swahilis along the coast called the mountain Kilimanjaro. Although he did not support his claim, he claimed that Kilimanjaro meant either mountain of greatness, or mountain of caravans. Under the latter meaning, Kilima meant mountain, and Jaro possibly meant caravans. Jim Thompson claimed in 1885, although he also did not support his claim. The term Kilimanjaro has generally been understood to mean the mountain of greatness. This is probably as good a derivation as any other, though not improbably it may mean the White Mountain, as I believe the term Njaro has in former times been used to denote whiteness, and though this application of the word is now obsolete on the coast, it is still heard among some of the interior tribes. Either translation is equally applicable. By the Washaga, the mountain is not known under one name, the two masses which form it being respectively named Kibo and Mawenzi. According to a website owned by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Njaro is an ancient Kiswahili word for shining. Similarly, Krapp wrote that a chief of the Wakamba people, whom he visited in 1849, had been to Jaga and had seen the Kilimanjaro, mountain of whiteness, the name given by the Wakamba to Kilimanjaro, more correctly in the Kakamba language. This would be Kiima Kai, and this possible derivation has been popular with several investigators. Others have assumed that Kilima is Kiswahili for mountain. The problem with this assumption is that Kilima actually means hill, and is, therefore, the diminutive of Mlima, the proper Kiswahili word for mountain. However, it is possible that an early European visitor, whose knowledge of Kiswahili was not extensive, changed Mlima to Kilima by analogy with the two Shaga names, Kibo and Mawenzi. A different approach is to assume that the Kiliman part of Kilimanjaro comes from the Kikaga Kilim, which means, which defeats, or Kililima, which means, which has become difficult or impossible. The Jaro part would then be derived from Njare, a bird, or, according to other informants, a leopard, or, possibly from Jaro, a caravan. According to one, Ashaga informant, the old men tell the story that long ago the Ashaga, having seen the snowy dome, decided to go up to investigate. Naturally, they did not get very far. Hence the name, Kilimanjaro, or Kilimanjaro, or possibly Kilimanjaro etc., which defeats, or which is impossible for, the bird, the leopard, or the caravan. This is attractive as being entirely made up of Ashaga elements based on an imaginable situation, but the fact remains that the name Kilimanjaro is not, and apparently never has been, current among the Ashaga as the name of the mountain. Is this then only, as other Ashaga suggest, a latter-day attempt to find a Ashaga explanation when pressed to do so by a foreign inquirer? Is it perhaps arguable that the early porters from the coast hearing the Ashaga say Kilimanjaro or Kilimanjaro, meaning simply that it was impossible to climb the mountain, imagined this to be the name of the mountain, and associated it with their own climber? Did they then report to the European leaders of the expedition that the name of the mountain was their version of the Kikaga, which, further assimilated by the European Shira, finally became standardized as Kilimanjaro? In the 1880s, the mountain became a part of German East Africa and was called Kalima Ndscharo in German following the Kiswahili name components. On October 6, 1889, Hans Mayer reached the highest summit on the crater ridge of Kibo. He named it Kaiser Wilhelm Spitze. That name apparently was used until Tanzania was formed in 1964, when the summit was renamed Uhuru, meaning Freedom Peak in Kiswahili. The Kaiser Wilhelm Spitze, with its altitude of 58.95 meters, was known at the time as the highest mountain of the German Empire. Climbing history. According to the famous English geographer Harford Mackinder, it was the missionary Rebman of Mombasa who, in 1848, first reported the existence of Kilimanjaro. In 1861, the German officer Baron Karl Claus von der Decken and the young British geologist Richard Thornton made a first attempt to climb Kibo, but got no farther than 8,200 feet. In 1862, von der Decken tried a second time together with Otto Kersen. They reached a height of 14,000 feet. In 1887, during his first attempt to climb Kilimanjaro, the German geology professor Hans Mayer reached the base of Kibo, but was forced to turn back, not having the equipment necessary to handle the deep snow and ice on Kibo. The following year, Mayer planned another attempt with cartographer Oscar Baumann, but the mission was aborted due to consequences of the Abushiri revolt. Mayer and Baumann were captured and held hostage, and only escaped after a 10,000 rupees ransom had been paid. In 1889 Mayer returned to Kilimanjaro with the celebrated Austrian mountaineer Ludwig Perchella for a third attempt. Their climbing team included 2 local headmen, 9 porters, a cook, and a guide. The success of this attempt, which started on foot from Mombasa, was based on the establishment of many campsites with food supplies so that multiple attempts at the top could be made without having to descend too far. Mayer and Perchella pushed near the crater rim on October 3, but turned around exhausted from hacking footsteps in the icy slope. 3 days later they reached the highest summit on the southern rim of the crater on Perchella's 40th birthday. They were the first to confirm that Kibo has a crater, which was filled with ice at the time. After descending to the saddle between Kibo and Mawenzi, Mayer and Perchella attempted to climb the more technically challenging Mawenzi next, but could only reach a 50-96 m high subsidiary peak before retreating due to illness. On October 18, they reascended Kibo to enter and study the crater, cresting the rim at Hans Mayer's notch. In total, Mayer and Perchella spent 16 days above 4,200 m during their expedition. The summit of Kibo wouldn't be climbed again until 20 years later by the surveyor M. Lang in 1909. The first ascent of the highest summit of Mawenzi was only on July 29, 1912, by the German climbers Edward Oweyer and Fritz Kloot, who christened it Hans Mayer Peak in Mayer's honor. Oweyer and Kloot went on to make the third ascent of Kibo, via the western route over the Drygalski Glacier. In 1989, the organizing committee of the 100-year celebration of the first ascent decided to award posthumous certificates to the African porter guides who had accompanied Mayer and Perchella. One person in pictures or documents of the 1889 expedition was thought to match a living inhabitant of Marangu, Ioane Kanila Loo. Loo did not know his own age nor did he remember Mayer or Perchella, but he remembered joining a Kilimanjaro expedition involving a Dutch doctor who lived near the mountain and that he did not get to wear shoes during the 8-day affair. Loo claimed that he had climbed the mountain 3 times before World War I. The committee concluded that he had been a member of Mayer's team and therefore must have been born around 1871. Loo died on May 10, 1996 and is now often suggested as co-first descendant of Kilimanjaro. Mapping. Early maps of Kilimanjaro were published by the British government's Directorate of Overseas Surveys in 1963. These were based on air photography carried out as early as 1959 by the RAF. These were on a scale of 1, 50,000 with contours at 100 ft intervals. These are now unavailable. Tourist mapping was first published by the Ordnance Survey in England in 1989 based on the original DOS mapping. This is also no longer available. EWP produced a map with tourist information in 1990. In the last few years, numerous other maps have become available of various qualities. 3D route maps are also available online. Trekking Kilimanjaro. There are 7 official trekking routes by which to ascend and descend Mount Kilimanjaro: Lemoshu, Makame, Marangu, Mwaka, Rongai, Shira, and Umbwe. Of all the routes, Makame is considered the most scenic, albeit steeper, route. It can be done in 6 or 7 days. The Rongai is the easiest and least scenic of all camping routes. The Marangu is also relatively easy, but this route tends to be very busy. The ascent and descent routes are the same, and accommodation is in shared huts with all other climbers. People who wish to trek to the summit of Kilimanjaro are advised to undertake appropriate research and ensure that they are both properly equipped and physically capable. Though the climb is technically not as challenging as when climbing the high peaks of the Himalayas or Andes, the high elevation, low temperature, and occasional high winds make this a difficult and dangerous trek. Acclimatization is essential, and even the most experienced trekkers suffer some degree of altitude sickness. Kilimanjaro summit is well above the altitude at which high-altitude pulmonary edema or high-altitude cerebral edema can occur. All trekkers will suffer considerable discomfort, typically shortage of breath, hypothermia, and headaches. High-altitude climbing clubs are citing safe ascent rate suggestions offered by organizations such as the Royal Geographical Society have criticized the Tanzanian authorities for charging fees for each day spent on the mountain. It was once argued that this fee structure encouraged trekkers to climb rapidly to save time and money, while proper acclimatization demands that delays are built into any high climb. However, in response to this accusation, the Tanzania National Parks Authority several years ago mandated minimum climb durations for each route. These regulations prohibit climbs of fewer than 5 days on the Marangu route, and ensure a minimum of 6 days for the other 5 sanctioned routes. These minimums are particularly in the case of Marangu, which ostensibly allows that Uhuru Peak can be reached from a starting elevation at 1,860 m within 72 hours of beginning the ascent. Are reckoned by most alpinists to allow an ascent rate that will usually result in a climber failing to acclimatize adequately, by the time that Kibo huts are reached. The launch base from which the summit is assaulted. Consequently, the incidence of acute mountain sickness is widely deemed to be unacceptably high on Kilimanjaro, with high volumes of fit young people succumbing to the condition, having opted for a relatively rapid ascent. As a general rule, it is far safer to avoid altitude sickness by planning a sensible itinerary that allows for gradual acclimatization to high elevation as one ascends. Operations that typically see in excess of 1,000 climbers summiting annually and are best placed to identify such patterns, usually posit that an optimal climb length should last around 7 to 8 days. Tanzanian medical services around the mountain have expressed concern recently over the current influx of tourists that apparently perceive Kilimanjaro as an easy walk. However, this is not the case. Many individuals require significant attention during their attempts, and many are forced to abandon the trek. An investigation into the matter concluded that tourists visiting Tanzania were often encouraged to join groups heading up the mountain without being made aware of the significant physical demands of the climb, although many outfitters and tour operators flaunt high success rates for reaching the summit. The Kilimanjaro National Park shows that only 41% of trekkers actually reach the Uhuru summit, with the majority turning around at Gilmani unregistered trademark South Point, 300 meters short of Uhuru, or Stella Point, 200 meters short of Uhuru. Kilimanjaro is often underestimated because it can be walked and is not a technical climb. However, many mountaineers consider Kilimanjaro very physically demanding. Some estimate that more people have died to date trekking up Kilimanjaro than Mount Everest, but Everest is attempted by significantly fewer climbers. In August 2007, 4 trekkers died within a week, underscoring the point that trekking to the summit should not be taken casually. Multiple people die on the mountain each year. The majority of these deaths are porters due to hypothermia. Trekkers fall on steep portions of the mountain, and rock slides have killed trekkers. For this reason, the route via the Arrow Glacier was closed for several years. It reopened in December 2007, but the park officials advise against taking that route and tell trekkers that they can climb, but at their own risk. When attempting the Arrow Glacier route, trekkers must leave early in the morning and make it past the rock face before mid-afternoon, is when the sun comes out, and frozen rock slides become quite common. Unique vegetation. Being an Afro-montane sky island, Kilimanjaro has an enormous biodiversity while low in endemic species. However, endemics include the giant groundsels in the bunchgrass tussock grasslands, and other flora adapted to living in alpine plant conditions. Kilimanjaro has a large variety of forest types over an altitudinal range of 3,000 am, containing over 1,200 vascular plant species. Montanocotia forests occur on the wet southern slope. Cassiopeirea and juniperous forests grow on the dry northern slope. Subalpine erica forests at 4,100 am represent the highest elevation cloud forests in Africa. In contrast to this enormous biodiversity, the degree of endemism is low. However, forest relicts in the deepest valleys of the cultivated lower areas suggest that a rich forest flora inhabited Mount Kilimanjaro in the past, with restricted range species otherwise only known from the eastern Arcade Mountains. The low degree of endemism on Kilimanjaro may result from destruction of lower elevation forest rather than the relatively young age of the mountain. Another feature of the forests of Kilimanjaro is the absence of a bamboo zone, which occurs on all other tall mountains in East Africa with a similarly high rainfall. Cinnarondonaria alpina stands are favored by elephants and African buffaloes elsewhere. On Kilimanjaro, these herbivores occur on the northern slopes, where it is too dry for a large bamboo zone to develop. They are excluded from the wet southern slope forests by topography and humans, who have cultivated the foothills for at least 2,000 years. This interplay of biotic and abiotic factors could explain not only the lack of a bamboo zone on Kilimanjaro but also offers possible explanations for the patterns of diversity and endemism. If true, Kilimanjaro's forests would serve as a striking example of the large and long-lasting influence of both animals and humans on the African landscape. Physical features. Kilimanjaro rises approximately 5,100 am from its base in the plains near Moshi. Kibo is capped by an almost symmetrical cone with scarps rising 180 to 200 m on the south side. These scarps define a 2.5 km wide caldera. Within this caldera is an inner crater, the Ruche crater. This inner crater was named after Dr. Richard Ruche. The name was conferred by the government of Tanganyika in 1954. At the same time, it awarded Ruche a gold medal on having climbed Kilimanjaro for the 25th time. Ruche climbed Kilimanjaro 65 times and helped to establish the exact elevation of the crater. Within the Ruche crater lies the ash pit. The Ruche crater itself is nearly surrounded by a 400 feet high dune of volcanic ash. Ice. In the late 1880s, the summit of Kibo was completely covered by an ice cap with outlet glaciers cascading down the western and southern slopes, and except for the inner cone, the entire caldera was buried. Glacier ice flowed also through the western breach. An examination of ice cores taken from the North Icefield Glacier indicates that the snows of Kilimanjaro have a basal age of 11,700 years. A continuous ice cap covering approximately 400 square kilometers covered the mountain during the period of maximum glaciation, extending across the summits of Kibo and Mawenzi. The glacial ice survived drought conditions during a 3-century period beginning 2200 BC. The period from 1912 to present has witnessed the disappearance of more than 80% of the ice cover on Kilimanjaro. From 1912 to 1953 there was 1% annual loss, while 1989–2007 saw 2.5% annual loss. Of the ice cover still present in 2000, 26% had disappeared by 2007. While the current shrinking and thinning of Kilimanjaro's ice fields appears to be unique within its almost 12-millennium history, it is contemporaneous with widespread glacier retreat in mid to low latitudes across the globe. At the current rate, Kilimanjaro is expected to become ice-free sometime between 2022 and 2033. See also, third currency Nglea Glacier, list of volcanoes in Tanzania, Mount Kenya, a collapsed stratovolcano 200 miles due north, in Kenya. Rebman Glacier, the snows of Kilimanjaro, references. Further reading, Dundas, Sir Charles Kilimanjaro and Its People, A History of the Ashaga, Their Laws, Customs and Legends, together with some account of the highest mountain in Africa 1st edition London, Cass. Ernest Hemingway, The Snows of Kilimanjaro. Freeman, Susie. In My Wildest Dreams, A Woman's Humorous Perspective of Her Mount. Kilimanjaro Experience, External links, Mount Kilimanjaro National Park, NASA Earth Explorer page, Current weather on Kilimanjaro, Glacial recession of southern icefields Mount Kilimanjaro live webcam, Kilimanjaro Flora Picture Gallery, aerial photographs of Mount Kilimanjaro, 1937-38 University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Libraries Digital Collections, Kilimanjaro, How Hard Is It to Climb Mount Kilimanjaro?